Right, hello everybody, and welcome. We've now hit plus 50 participants, which is what we were hoping for. Welcome to today's EMLS share training session. I think we booked our slot approximately a year ago in a sort of leveling up 2023 update and speculated what we might talk about. So before we start, I've got a bit of housekeeping to share with you all. There's a few housekeeping points and instructions. You'll find a banner along the bottom of your screen, and here you can see that there is an option to view the Q&As box and another to view the chat box. And for any questions to the speakers, please use the Q&As box and ask them as we go along, and we will bring them in at the end of the session. If you have any technical issues on the webinar, we've got our marketing team in the background, and you can get in touch with them using the chat box. The marketing team here will be in control of the slides, so you'll be hearing the word next a lot. That is not because we're advertising that retail chain. Oh, that's not in the script. Oh, and during the presentation, we might ask them to move on to the next slide. Sorry. After the session, you'll receive a feedback form directly from EMLS Share. Please complete this and send it back to them, as your feedback is very much valued. Finally, we are recording this webinar, and this recording will be made available to all attendees, so don't worry if you miss anything. I think the first thing I have to do is to fold my arms in order that I look completely brand compliant with the first slide, because all the photographs require you to fold your arms when you're doing an EMLS show workshop. I have now done that. And on to the next slide, please. Here are all the glorious firms who are partner firms for EMLS Share, and obviously we chose to be in alphabetical order, so we're first listed. If any law firm changes its name, another one gets appointed, which precedes us, we'll change our name to Aardvark Lawyers. On to the next slide, please. From Anthony Collins, we've got two people, me and Stuart. Stuart doesn't look any younger or older from that photograph, whereas I am considerably aged now since that photograph was taken. And we have as our very special guest, Eleanor Bainbridge from Rotherham Council, from their economic development section, because we promised that we would be talking about real live examples of levelling up happening in a local authority, which is probably going to be the most interesting part of our session. And after we've had a chat with Eleanor, we're going to have Stuart talk about the planning and infrastructure updates which have come through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. We used to call it LURB, now we call it LURA, which sounds very interesting. And then I'm going to do a lot less interesting stuff about combined authorities, which will be of relevance to some of you, but not others, but just to give you a bit of a taste of that subject. So if I can have the next slide, please, that would be great. Levelling up. So where are we? Well, the Levelling Up white paper set up a number of ambitions, but basically it's a load of jargon, the word levelling up, even so much so that a government department has adopted it in its name. I very much doubt that if there was a change of government that we would have the word levelling up in there. As part of this, there were 4 investment programs which were set up, and the UK Community Renewal Fund was launched, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and we're getting to hear quite a lot about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund at the moment in terms of people implementing schemes or making further applications under that. That, of course, was intended to replace regional aid monies from Europe, and it kind of does, but not quite on the scale which we were experiencing. So on to the next slide. And then you have the Community Ownership Fund, which is about enabling communities to benefit from local facilities and community assets. And we've got a tremendous amount of experience of that over the years, having done the original community asset transfer toolkit back in the days when this was promoted under the previous Labour administration. And round 3 for the funding is going to open on the 6th of December 2023. And then we have the Levelling Up Fund, which has had the first 2 rounds, awarding £3.8 billion to projects relating to regeneration and town centres and local transport and cultural and heritage assets. And round 3 has recently taken place, with funding being awarded to high quality bids submitted in round 2 rather than on a competitive basis. And what I want to mention most particularly at this point in time is that on the 17th of November this year, the National Audit Office came up with its report on levelling up funding to local government, and I can put that into the Q&A chat line, basically, where I can't actually. I would like to put it in the chat line somewhere, but I've got a link to that. But the point is that what the National Audit Office concluded was that 2 years ago, DLUC had a poor understanding of what had worked in the context of previous local growth programs. Essentially, quite a lot of amnesia happens institutionally in government departments. I mean, I go back to the days when we had the single regeneration budget, which was a very sensible way of coordinating funds many, many years ago under the John Major and Margaret Thatcher governments. All that learning seems to be lost. And more recently, the DLUC has been found to improve its oversight of levelling up funds. It was slow to do agree funding across the funds, and so it's taken a long time to implement them all. And DLUC has made considerable improvements to its approach since then to evaluation. Equally important is that any high quality learning from the evaluation work is carried forward. So essentially, they got a mild turning off from the National Audit Office. And as we know from our experience of working with DLUC, experiences can be varied in terms of their competence and ability to understand issues, and new people learning. Not to say they're not lacking in enthusiasm, but it's been very important for local authorities to build their links with DLUC in order to take things forward. And with that in mind, next slide, I'm actually going to introduce Eleanor to you. We've worked on providing subsidy control advice in relation to a number of schemes, some of which are listed there. But Eleanor, if I could start with a question for you.
Please.
How is it that Rotherham has worked very hard to apply for so many funds under the Levelling Up agenda, and how has this actually reflected the key areas of investment for Rotherham, which you've been actually trying to deal with over a number of years, if not decades?
Thank you. So hi, everyone. Very happy to be here today. My name is Eleanor Bainbridge. I'm a regeneration project manager at Rotherham Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with Rotherham, it's a town just to the northeast of Sheffield. Like many towns in this part of the country, it suffered a lot from economic decline following the demise of coal, steel manufacturing industry throughout the 80s and 90s. And the council put together an economic growth strategy in the Rotherham Plan 2025. So focusing on the strengths of Rotherham, which is generally expertise in engineering and manufacturing, but also cultural assets and green spaces, in order to increase the level of investment, develop high-value jobs and skills, develop economic resilience, and build opportunities for growth across the region. I think another key setback that Rotherham has is the lack of transport connectivity. So not as part of Levelling Up, but we are looking at getting Rotherham back on the kind of mainline train station for a town the size of Rotherham. It really ought to have much better transport links. So that's kind of another thing that adds to the feeling of being cut off. In terms of levelling up, so it's really important to have these sorts of funds, because a lot of the sites that we're looking at to transform are not attractive to the private sector. They quite often have very complicated ground conditions. If it's in the town centre, it might be prone to flooding and have different risks associated with it. So while there are a lot of opportunities, I think, in terms of securing parcels of land and then developing them into sort of industrial or creative enterprises, actually getting the money to do that is a real challenge. So we've really targeted different areas in Rotherham. So a big part of our focus has been the town centre. Anyone who's familiar, you can see that there are quite a few derelict buildings. There's been kind of difficulties in getting businesses to be able to stay in the town centre. There's a big perception of, excuse me, a lack of safety. And that really affects kind of nighttime uses. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. As I was saying, yeah. So that affects the potential for kind of nighttime use. We're also looking at jobs and skills. So how do we diversify the economy? Also looking at major attraction sites. So across Rotherham, things like major museums, cultural attractions, how to make those more sustainable in the long term so that they can run and provide more for the communities. As well as the main town centre of Rotherham, we also look at smaller centres, which include smaller projects, town centres, revitalising those, bringing more vitality to places like Wath, Dinnington and Maltby, which I believe we're going to cover. Thank you. Sorry about my cough.
So that's fine, Eleanor. We're all coughing and suffering a bit at the moment, and I'm certainly sounding deeper than I normally do. It's my Barry White impersonation. So yeah, and so we've over the last couple of years, actually, we've been sent quite a lot of queries about supporting the council in a range of schemes. And you mentioned Wath and Dinnington, for example, which are sort of outlying towns and really how they need regenerating. So we've actually covered with a great deal of interest the different schemes and ideas which you've had and been pursuing. And it is a bit like trying to push different buttons to get to a particular place, basically. But more recently, we've advised on these schemes like Temple Borough, Magna Science Park, etc. Would you like to say a little description of each of the schemes on the slide there, please, Eleanor? That'd be very helpful.
Sure. Sorry. Just need to, yeah. So Temple Borough and Magna, so those are actually linked projects. So
Yep.
Magna is a former steelworks that's been turned into a very interesting museum. So the former project is transforming a semi-derelict, big parcel of land that fronts a main road and building business startup units. So we call that creating a new kind of gateway to Temple Borough, which is sort of the first place you tend to go to coming from Sheffield, and is linked to this advanced manufacturing zone as well. So creating opportunities for small businesses and SMEs to set up there. Whereas the Magna funding is really to support their ongoing offer as a cultural hub, as an education hub, and support them in the long term, which is actually also what the Temple Borough project will do through creating some revenue income for them. With Wentworth, similarly, it's about this is a large country house that's it's got like the largest facade in the country. So it's about supporting that as an attraction, and again, what can be offered to increase kind of culture and leisure offer in Rotherham. Similarly with Gulliver's as well, which is mainly a sort of aimed at children as a destination. I'm not so familiar with the Maltby Learning Trust, I'm afraid, but the final project, so that's in the town centre, and it's a series of, we say, burnt out kind of derelict buildings that are really in poor condition, and being able to acquire that land and transform it into housing, which is another aspect that's really needed in the town centre, like bringing housing in and mixed use so that it is an active place at night and it is a place where people feel safe and want to spend time.
I think it's quite interesting, Eleanor. But I've been visiting Rotherham over quite a number of years now, and I think with the various developments, thinking about Corporation Street and things of that nature, I think there's certainly a lot of green shoots in the town centre. Would you agree now?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've sort of targeted a couple of very large developments and then some smaller ones as well. And both of those are really important for kind of bringing opportunity. Changing perception is a really big challenge, because a lot of the locals, they feel a certain way about the town centre and they've felt that way for a long time. So sort of getting people to feel more optimistic, and that, okay, if we do bring these opportunities, that people will be, there will be opportunities and there is potential for things to change there. But we're seeing that gradually, kind of the mentality shift as well when we talk to people.
I think the really good work you have done, you've done lots of good work in the town centre, is actually starting to make the River Don a little bit more central to what's happening. I think that's I think that sort of improving the frontage between the river and the town centre and the new development adjacent to the river, I think is pretty crucial.
Yeah, definitely. And there's actually a lot of sort of green assets in Rotherham, but
Yeah,
you wouldn't necessarily know because the town wasn't really built in that way. It was sort of turning its back to the river and the canal, whereas now we are trying to address that because it is quite a unique place to be able to sort of enjoy that setting. So yeah, it's really important to kind of enhance what Rotherham has.
absolutely, completely agree.
Yeah, so the Maltby Learning Trust was basically a refurbishment of some school buildings, basically, as part of a broader community project, really. But what we have found is that over the years, as you began your application processes, we would have to provide some kind of analysis of initially state aid, but then subsidy control treatment of different projects where the council was applying for funds. And unlike state aid, really, it's for the provider of the grant to be satisfied that the grant is lawful. It's not necessarily the job of the council, although the council has got that job when it then passes those grants or financial assistance onto other organisations. So we've had to play an interesting game pointing out to DLUC that we're not actually doing their job for them, but here are some thoughts from us, basically. So on the next slide, I've got, yeah, there we are. So I'm not going to go through a long and detailed description of subsidy control law and the Subsidy Control Act 2022, even though I'd love to, because actually what I wanted to do is to bring out some basic points, really. And the basic points to be considered in relation to a levelling up programme and grant applications is whether in the first case, the assistance given is actually financial assistance for the purposes of the Subsidy Control Act. And that's quite important, because if it's basically public body to public body funding and it doesn't go any further than the council, then it's not. And so that's the first thing which needs to be understood. And then the second question is, if it is going to third parties, is the support for an economic activity? And when you listen to the description given by Eleanor of, for example, Wentworth House, where that building is being refurbished for a lot of cultural purposes, then the answer to that is no, that is not for an economic activity. And there's very useful guidance given by the Department for Trade, which actually sets out business and trade, which sets out strategy guidance, a lot of detail, which is worth reading actually, because in there you'll see express acknowledgement that both cultural services, but also actually also education services are generally outside that scope. And then you have this question, and because levelling up sometimes affects housing, but mostly it's not. But it is, if it is a subsidy, is it lawful? And has there been what's called a principles-based assessment applied to that project? And there's a 2-page template which has come out from the government department, which you get to complete, which looks at 6 principles and takes you through how you answer those questions. And time again, we're being asked to support local authorities in the completion of that template. And so, for example, in relation to things like light industrial units or schemes which are likely to have some benefit to a private concern, it's likely to be a subsidy, but then you may want to actually justify it on the basis of the principles. And those questions which get looked at can range enormously, but essentially, is there a policy objective which the project is actually fulfilling? Is the first point to address. Is the actual amount of funding appropriate, i.e., can we show that without providing this funding, the scheme would not go ahead at all? And then, and can we show that it would not otherwise be commercially attractive? And as I say, then you've got the baseline no subsidy scenario. Would the project not go ahead? And then, in what respects would this project provide material benefits which wouldn't otherwise be delivered? So, for example, in the case of the Skill Street project, which is being developed, where young children would be asked to, or encouraged to attend experience of different careers and jobs, then providing the subsidy may actually lead them to exploring new careers and vocations that they may not have considered based on a genuinely participative experience. And then is the funding proportionate? Is it based on cost recovery, for example, and what benchmarks have been achieved to enable the value for money to be demonstrated? Has there been competition used in selecting contractors? And what happens to any surplus? So, for example, in this scheme, is the money being reinvested back into the project? Well, yes, it is. So that helps. And will it have any negative impact on competition or trade in the UK? And generally speaking, then you have to show. I mean, internationally, quite a lot of levelling up money has no impact at all. But the test is then what is the test in the UK, basically? So to comply with that, you make that assessment. So that is the template which gets to be used. And it's anticipated that the project can therefore provide a good, enjoyable experience for everybody involved without and can be justified by the financial assistance given. Now, the point is that if you've done this principles-based analysis, you then have to upload details of the subsidy to the UK subsidy control database within 3 months of the point that there is a binding commitment. A lot of local authorities don't want to make that disclosure, but I honestly say to you that actually it's a good thing to be transparent and to find a reasons why you might want to make that disclosure for something like that, because you shouldn't be afraid to be making subsidies. You should be clear about the reasons why you're doing so. And we've actually sat alongside our instructing officers at Rotherham, working out how to fill in the basic data, sat alongside Eleanor in that regard, and got it submitted, which was good learning for the council, but also good learning for us. Now, at this point, I see that there are 2 questions on there. Well, yes, I see what you're saying about it if they're acting as an enterprise, but the assumption is that that I'm talking about activities where the public body has a duty to carry those out, basically. Very rarely will the monies actually being received by the public body in levelling up scenarios as an enterprise in itself. It is generally acting as the public organisation. Because usually it will want to disseminate the money to other enterprises, not itself, really. So I kind of agree, but I'm not entirely in agreement with anonymous attendee. It says very exciting. name. It could be another 59 of you there. Yes, you're right. The guidance on public funding is brief and unclear, and it's not well defined. Agreed. Nevertheless, I say hooked on classics, and we should always seek to take advantage of things being vague, actually, and see what we can do in terms of exploiting that and making the case back in that regard. Thank you for those two questions, which I think are addressed. Do type in some more. I'm supposed to type in the answer. I'm not going to type in the answer, but there we are. So that is that. So Eleanor, any further remarks in terms of your direction of travel with Rotherham Council?
I think, well, no, all I wanted to add was that, yeah, it's been really important to have this assistance. I think navigating kind of what makes it a subsidy, is it in line with the policy of economic activity? It's quite complicated to get your head round and make sure that we're thinking through it in the right way. And it's obviously quite technical. We're not a team of people with legal expertise, so it's really important that we sort of get our approach right. And we have been quite successful in securing funding, but being able to make sure we are compliant and that we're in line with all of the reporting requirements, that uploading to this database within 3 months, for example, and then trying to get ahead of it by having the principles-based assessment, which is obviously preferable. So it's been a really important learning, and I think going forward we just need to make sure before we take on before we apply for further funds and before we take on further projects that we have a really good understanding of the subsidy control issues that we're likely to face. Thanks.
And what I would certainly say is that actually being really clear about what the policies of an authority are is going to be really important, not just in terms of subsidy control, but because of the Procurement Act 2023, which is coming through, because there is a section which requires local authorities to have regard to a number of things, but particularly giving access to the market on what their policies are and what drives their procurement. If you could use the same policy aims to actually drive your procurement and your subsidy control issues, that would be immensely useful and a good bit of joining up. And so, for example, local authorities are doing quite a bit, or some local authorities are doing quite a bit on community wealth building, and those kind of commitments to generating better benefits for local economies. That very same list could be used for both subsidy control principle-based analysis, but also for actually building much more into the specification of what you're buying through commissioning and procurement activities. So there's a real opportunity there. Eleanor, thank you very much for coming in, popping in and chatting with us. You're free to stay or you're free to go. Obviously, the highlights next will be Stuart talking about the change of the planning. And so if you'd like to stay and listen to him, do so. But otherwise, I'm very grateful for you coming. Thank you.
Eleanor, a big thank you.
Cheers.
Stuart.
Thank you, Mark. Could we have the first planning slide, please? Just starting with the planning, we're in a situation where there's an awful lot of change in planning legislation at the moment, and this is particularly shown by the new Act. We've got all of the changes in relation to biodiversity as well. The guidance has recently been released. And I appreciate local authorities or local planning authorities are presently working through that, looking at ways to enforce through conditions and through section 106. So just picking up on some of the changes. So locally led urban development corporations. I think urban development corporations, I'm afraid I'm old enough and long enough in the tooth to actually remember, urban development corporations a number of years ago, and I'm sure perhaps some of you are as well. But for example, and I've just written a few examples down, we had the Birmingham Heartlands Development Corporation, which was started in 1992 and it ended in 1998. So that was for urban development in the Heartlands area of Birmingham. Another example that we have at the moment of a form of development corporation is clearly at Ebbsfleet, which is in southeast England, in the Kent area, where they are busily developing a garden city, where by 2035 there should be 15,000 new homes. So there's lots of exciting opportunity. So the Act itself allows for locally led urban development corporations with the main purpose of regeneration for an area. So, for example, we've just been talking about Rotherham. Rotherham may be a good opportunity, but Rotherham may want to join with other South Yorkshire authorities to take this kind of thing forward. So maybe join with Doncaster or with Barnsley or with Sheffield. So the new LUDCs will be accountable to local authorities rather than the Secretary of State. So importantly, the Act has changed the process for establishing a locally led new town development corporation by removing the limit on borrowing, which we'll have to see where that goes, and the number of board members allowed. So the Act has updated the planning powers available, which follows the mayoral development corporation model. So this allows planning powers to be given to local and central development corporations so that they can become their own local planning authorities for the purpose of the local plan making, neighbourhood planning, and also development management. The old development corporations that I mentioned, sort of back in the 1990s, had similar powers. And I remember when I was working for Wolverhampton Council a number of years ago, where we were dealing directly with the Black Country Development Corporation on a regular basis. And once the Black Country Corporation disappeared, we were then sort of dealing with the aftermath of conditions, permissions, 106 agreements, and various other things. So exciting new area. Let's see how many of these are actually set up. Could we move to the next slide, please? Compulsory purchase orders. Now, I often think that local authorities are probably cautious about local compulsory purchase orders, and I think that is probably understandable. They are complex, and you have to make sure that you get the right powers. For example, you know, there's a number of specialist powers for its education-based land. So there are CPO powers under the Education Act, but probably the most widely used powers are probably under the Highways Act 1980 as amended, and also the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as amended. And we have recently used the planning powers working with Historic England in Shropshire, taking forward the Flax Mill project. And we're also working on a new relief road using potentially the highway powers. So the compulsory purchase order system has changed with the aim of streamlining and modernising CPOs. And I think the thing that we need is simplification to an extent. So it grants local authorities the power to use a CPO for the purposes of regeneration, similar to those used by Homes England and also the Greater London Authority. So the changes should improve transparency regarding local authority powers to acquire brownfield land for the purpose of regeneration in their area. The measure has been put in place to speed up the delivery of projects, whereas CPO is needed. CPO, sometimes with various challenges, can take an awful long time and are very costly, which I think concerns a lot of authorities. But when you're helping a body for a project where clearly that body, such as Historic England, wants to use your powers, it's important to get the appropriate indemnity agreement in place so the council's position is safeguarded. So the changes give greater discretion to the acquiring authority to use the procedure where they see best fits the land when considering objections, so e.g. public inquiry or representations. So the Act implements a provision which allows the CPO to be conditionally confirmed, which encourages authority to make the CPO earlier in the process, alongside funding processes, including the justification for the CPO. I think it's going to be interesting to be seen whether this idea of conditionality, because a lot to do with the CPO process is negotiating with the various landowners in the background. So will this assist in providing the local council with that additional sort of pressure with the conditionality of a CPO that perhaps it can place on landowners to perhaps bring the CPO process to an earlier conclusion or a settlement to be reached? Quite interested to see what you feel, what you feel your views on that are, and whether you are an authority that uses CPOs on a regular basis. I know CPO powers are being used more and more. So the Act also increases the flexibility of the time in which the acquiring authority becomes a legal owner of the land to allow the process to be postponed if needed. Could we move to the next slide, please? So there's been subtle changes in the local plan process as well. And I think it's just interesting to remember, certainly with local plans, the changes which are being brought forward is that the whole process should be completed within 30 months. This is what PINS is being told, and that the local planning authority needs to be seen to be updating their plans on a five-yearly basis. The duty to cooperate has also been repealed, but apparently this is being replaced by more flexible arrangements, but we still need to see the detail of that. A lot of the detail clearly will be in the regulations. So what we now have, we have supplementary plans and spatial development strategies. So spatial development strategies have been around for a period of time, particularly for combined authorities. For example, spatial development strategies are used by Liverpool, the combined authority in Merseyside. But particularly the spatial strategies. So local authorities will be able to produce a voluntary spatial development strategy on specific issues that could be cross-boundary. So this can be done by a group of authorities where they can collaborate to produce the development strategy. But this must produce a strategic planning policy for an issue which covers all of their areas. So I think it's interesting. We heard from Rotherham. Again, it might be, for example, I don't know, design maybe. It might be that something as specific as that, or something which is transportation linked. There may be that need for all the South Yorkshire authorities to work together. So Barnsley, Sheffield, Doncaster, and clearly Rotherham. So there is that opportunity with the new legislation. And my slide just indicates, and I've just outlined that to you, that there are similar powers for the mayoral combined authorities, which have been utilised by Manchester and also Liverpool. We also have supplementary plans. So planning authorities have new powers to enable them to quickly create supplemental plans for an area. So this response could be regeneration focused. So it might be a design code for a specific area or a whole area, just as an example. Clearly, all of this needs to go through a process, particularly the spatial development plans, as you would expect, will be subject to the appointment of a panel, the need for strategic environmental assessments, habitats regulations, the public sector equality duty. So all of that needs to be followed, and clearly for either there will need to be the need for consultation and the greatest transparency. I think it's important, while we're just talking about supplementary plans and spatial development strategies, to also mention this new process of National Development Management Policies, NDMPS, which very, very catchy in that sense. So the idea is that these NDMPs, I think it's probably easy to say National Development Management Policies, will actually sit beside the local plan for various authorities, local authorities. So decisions, as always, need to be made in accordance with the local plan policies, but also now also in accordance with DMPSs, unless clearly there are demonstrable other material considerations. But I think the interesting thing here is, so decisions made in accordance with plan policies and MDPSs, but if there's a conflict between local plan policies and NDMPSs, the NDPMSs will actually have priority. So that gives you that sort of greater national control of strategic planning policies. We'll have to see whether it works. We'll have to see whether it survives the outcome of the next election, which can be said for an awful lot of these changes, perhaps bar the biodiversity changes. Could I have the next slide, please? So land allocation decisions. So planning authorities are now able to base their land allocation decisions on the option price of sites, which is offered to them by developers. So landowners can submit their land for sale by a process of allocation as part of the local plan process. A further need to review local plans if your authority is not yet doing that. Local authorities can then allocate the land based on the option price and the planning considerations associated with the land at the time. So the auction will then bid the development rights to the buyer once the land is allocated in the local plan. So the difference in the option price offered by a landowner and the price offered to develop the allocated site will be used by the authority to benefit the community. This difference in price will subsequently be used to support further developments or projects in the area. So local planning authorities are permitted to evaluate financial benefits which may arise from the options when making decisions about the local plan and the land allocation. It's going to be interesting to see how this works. I think we need more guidance and more regulation. We need to see basically the detail of how this is going to be taken forward. Could we have the next slide, please? I think, Mark, we're back with you now.
Go back to your previous slide, Stuart. You've looked at this more than I have, but I'm generally puzzled as to when a local authority would be wanting to do this land allocation process. What's behind it?
I suppose what's behind it, through the local plan process, Mark, there's always been the need to allocate land for certain purposes.
Yes.
So, for example, we'll use Rotherham as an example. I think it's a good example. You've got land allocation, for example, in Waverley for a lot of residential development and a local centre as well in education areas. I think this will just provide a local authority perhaps a further opportunity through this land allocation process to provide benefit maybe to that project, but to other projects in the area. But I think the danger here is that this could just be one of those powers which isn't used
No,
because people
exactly.
won't necessarily understand it.
No.
We need to see the regulation on it. But I suppose the other point is, will landowners actually willingly take part in this process? I think that's going to be another question. But I think there are so many changes coming through with new legislation at the moment. And I think we need to see the detail, which is so normal at the moment with the things that we do seem to be getting from central government. We don't always get the detail, and you're sort of feeling around to see how things are actually going to work. And what we've got to remember at the moment, we're going to have one of the biggest changes. 106, for all intents and purposes, unless it's specialist areas, potentially is going to disappear, and it's going to be replaced by a local charging process for all new development. And again, I think a lot of authorities are actually concerned about this. And it's going to be, again, interesting to see how it develops. And if we do have a new government, for example, in May, to see whether this actually survives.
No
Because
question.
I think Labour have already indicated that they're quite satisfied that 106 works quite well. So, it's a bit of a boiling pot at the moment, Mark. And yeah, I think we've just got to see what happens.
How will if there's a lot less use of Section 106 schemes, how will allocations of affordable housing be secured in that case?
Well, affordable housing, I think the point is that with affordable housing, I think 106 will still be applicable to affordable housing. There's still going to be some areas where 106 is not going to disappear. And I think the detail for affordable housing will be one of those areas, certainly the mechanism. But I think there's then going to be a crossover with the new community charge or the new planning charge, which will then clearly subsidise affordable housing development as it does now. And we'll have to work with Homes England subsidies as well, Mark.
Right. And do you know what's behind this withdrawal of the duty to cooperate? Bearing in mind other parts of the new legislation say you must work in groups of local authorities, like the spatial development stuff. I didn't really understand that bit.
I'm going to be controversial now, aren't I? And I'm never controversial usually, Mark, but very laid back. But I think I don't think it's actually ever properly worked, to be honest.
Right.
And I think central government appreciates that, and I think there's got to be acknowledgement centrally, and perhaps we have with these catchily called MDMPSs, which sounds like something to do with MPs, to be honest. But I think there's that acknowledgement through this form of national policy that we do need some more regional policy. And I think there's a flavour in the new legislation of trying to see local authorities actually cooperate, actually work together. So you've actually got that formation of regional policy again. I'm dealing with a local plan at the moment. I won't mention which one, but you have a quite consolidated urban area where it's you've got unitary authority, but it's surrounded by districts and a county, and you're depending on the districts and the county to an extent to work with you. So, okay, you can't do the impossible, and you have to keep a good folder of evidence. If one authority isn't going to work with you and take some of your 5-year housing supply, well, you have to evidence that. But it doesn't work well, and you have memorandums of understanding, and it's costly and it takes forever. So that's my thoughts on that. So we do need regional policy again.
Well, my little question and answer session with you has enabled people to write in some questions in the question section. So let's just go through those questions. The first question is, how is best value reconciled in terms of land allocation planning process? I think they mean best consideration. I mean, that is a good question. Yeah.
I think it is a good question. I think the point is we need to see more regulations, don't we? I think that's the point. We need to see the detail. Um, and which is actually going to be the overriding duty. Presumably it's got to be put for best value purpose, hasn't it?
You'd have thought so. My concern is that one bit of the government department hasn't really thought through how you reconcile this with Section 123, and there is a lack of joining up, basically. But I might just be me being cynical.
I agree. I'm just looking at the other questions from our. This person's very busy. Our anonymous attendee, and also Dave Anthony. I agree. I don't think 106 is going to disappear. And to be fundamental, I don't want 106 to disappear. It's very important to me, 106, in different ways. And I agree, just dealing with that first point, 106 is crucial to the biodiversity net gain provisions. Yeah, I'm doing a number of 106 agreements in that form at the moment, also through conditions. So potentially could increase, but it's the melting pot again. We've just got to see how that works out. But we've got covenants here as well. So as a consequence, 106 is one way that can be dealt with it, but I'm also seeing quite detailed conditions as well. So I think that's going to be down to best practice. And I agree with Dave Anthony as well. They're not going to disappear completely. They're going to be needed there for specialist areas of work, biodiversity being an example. And it might be that it's also felt that it's something you have a very large land allocation, it's a specific project. 106 might still be the appropriate way of dealing with that. So 106 isn't going to disappear, but I think the government's ethos is it doesn't want 106 used so much, and that's why they brought the new infrastructure levy forward.
And he's made there's a fourth comment there now, Stuart.
Is there? Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh.
On your favourite subject, NDP MPs.
Yeah. It's amazing what you could actually think NDMPs could be. They could be naughty. No, I don't know. We won't go into that one. The stated aims of ND is to standardise common policies. Yeah, absolutely, and that is the point. And it's that sort of it's that national policy that's coming forward. Green belts being a really good example, and heritage. So yes, and it's just ensuring that the local plan process and clearly the NDMPs work together. But I think there probably will be conflicts, and I'm sure that there will be challenges in the courts, which are good for lawyers, of course. But that's always going to happen. But yeah, no, I completely agree, Dave. Any more questions?
Any more questions, or shall we go on to my next section?
Shall we make a start on yours, Mark?
Yeah,
and we can always come back.
Please. Yeah. So, just going to cover two aspects. One is changes in terms of the way in which constitutions and areas and other sort of aspects of current combined authorities might be changed, and also the introduction of the concept of the county combined authority. So starting with changes to combined authorities, I think the important thing to acknowledge is that largely speaking, the current combined authorities cover mainly urban areas, although Cambridgeshire and Peterborough combined authority is the exception to that, really. There's a new ability for the appropriate person. By that we mean the potential of the mayor of the combined authority, or one of the or it might be somebody who is a county council or district council, which is a constituent member, to propose a review, provided that the combined authority consents, really. The actual consent to review the constitution does not include the mayor. Now, I think that is quite important, because a lot of local authorities or combined authorities have got the core group of constituent members, and that's clearly an example as Greater Manchester Combined Authority, but others have got constituent authorities and non-constituent authorities, as is in the case of the West Midlands Combined Authority, really. And where there is political, some of the combined authorities have very little in the way of political disagreement or tension, although or at least outwardly, internally they do. But in those areas where there is some contention, then it is conceivable that that there will be requests to change the constitution and the way things are ordered there. And there's also a new consultation requirement for proposals to change existing combined authority amendments, and there must be public consultation across the combined authority area before doing so. Where we have come across an issue is consent for changes to the combined authority area, where under the previous legislation, in order to change the combined authority by admitting another local authority, was only made if there was consent from the council, which was actually seeking to join the combined authority, and the mayor. But now for a mayoral combined authority, only the consent from the relevant council and the mayor needed. It doesn't need the consent of the combined authority itself. And I think that actually that's quite disruptive to the relationship between the constituent authorities, the combined authority, and the mayor. A number of them will have been unwilling to go down the direction of combined authority, but realize that actually the big carrot, as will be the case with county combined authorities, is money and the devolution of powers and the provision of grants from central government. And so we can see that will be quite tricky, really. And then there's a new layer of consultation requirements where there's combined thing. The mayor has to consult with the residents of the area to be added, and the Secretary of State has to consult with the Boundary Commission before making an order. So there's a bit of a process there, and it will rear its head from time to time. And also there is also a new process whereby for direct conferral of general functions on a mayor, like GPOC or other wider functions which have been allocated from other agencies, like for example those of DLUC in its guise of Homes England, it required the consent not only of the combined authority, but also each local authority in its area, as well as the combined authority itself. That has now been replaced by a new procedure which can be requested by the mayor, and he is required to consult the constituent councils, but if they don't consent, he can go ahead and request the expansion of powers. Now, I don't actually understand why that would be required as an issue, because surely most combined authorities will want, and their constituent council will want them to have broader powers in the first place, because that is all about decentralization and delegation of functions from central government, not taking powers up from local authorities, generally speaking. Next slide, please. There is also, controversially, at least in the West Midlands, a process for consenting to the conferral of police and crime commissioner functions on the mayor, where the mayor can request it, and whereas before this was not possible because consent was needed from the county and district councils of the area, now only the consent of the mayor is needed. And in the West Midlands Combined Authority, this has been requested, even though actually there was a police and crime commissioner working in parallel. And so it remains to be seen what will happen there. Safe to say that in defence of the police and crime commissioner of West Midlands, he's actually a former sort of lawyer acting for the defence of criminals who everybody respected. So it would be an enormous shame for him to be not given visibility. But we'll see what happens at the next election for the mayor, because if it moves to Labour, maybe he'll be a deputy mayor, who knows. But I do see that actually that is mixing up things a bit. I can see the sense in terms of fire functions, and I can see the sense in terms of some of the other blue light functions, but police and crime is actually something which does require a focus. But nevertheless, the tapestry of different layers and different types of authorities will continue to grow. And I don't know why you'd want a different mayoral title than being mayor. I don't know what that means in practice. Next slide. Now, what is becoming quite prevalent is the concept of the new combined county authority, which would really require a model of devolution which includes upper tier local authorities only, such as county councils and unitary authorities. For example, the new East Midlands Combined County Authority, which is Derbyshire and Derby, Nottinghamshire and Nottingham, but not the district councils there. That is quite an important sort of development. Again, this is another layer of local government, rather than necessarily addressing proper devolution of powers all the way down to districts and beyond to parish councils, and a layering, or to be able to devolve larger sub-regional investment and delegation of funds and money. So it's all about moving money in a way which is accountable, but in doing so, creating more complicated governance. And if I may say so, the one thing which is certainly the case is that complicated governance often leads to very poor outcomes. Simple governance leads to complicated outcomes being achieved because it doesn't get in the way. But nevertheless, this is what's happening here. And I do know that actually in the case of that combined county authority, you'll notice it says Derbyshire and Derby, Nottinghamshire and Nottingham, but it doesn't include Leicestershire, and Leicester City. And so there's only so far you can go for political reasons. Next slide. County combined authorities must meet the following conditions: whole area of a two-tier county council, and one or more of the unitary council basically being there, and no part of the area must form part of the area of another combined county authority, or the area of a combined authority, or the integrated transport area of an integrated transport authority. So it is in all the gaps which that might be available. Whereas combined authorities can be comprised of a minimum of 2 more local authority areas in the area, and we are seeing certainly in the northeast the integration of combined authorities into a single one, having had different ones in different parts of the northeast. Again, for internal political reasons, they seem to be coming together. Next slide. There's a whole process in there about public consultation, which you expect. What's interesting is that the test, establishing one, is that it's likely to improve the economic, social, and environmental well-being, which of course is the formula which is used for the old power of local authorities to promote well-being in their areas, and which was abolished by Eric Pickles in the Fit of Peak, but also is reflected in the formula for the Public Services Social Value Act 2012, which used that formula, borrowing it from that power to promote local authorities to promote well-being. So everything comes back full cycle, basically. And it's appropriate having regard to the need for effective and convenient local government, and reflects the identities and interests of local communities. Everybody must consent, and the establishment will achieve the purpose, and the required public consultation has been carried out. All of those are things you'd expect to see, to be quite frank. Next slide. Yeah, as you would expect to see, they may make regulations on the constitutional arrangements of the combined county combined authority, and for the ability for the mayor or any other appropriate person to review the constitutional arrangements and changes for changes to consent, again similar to as for a combined authority under LIRA. Next slide. Have you got any questions? You can ask questions on the last bit about combined authorities, but you may want to come back to what other broader factors make a project which works within the Levelling Up agenda a success. And if you've got thoughts, then do add them to the Q&As and let us know what you think. If you want to speak, please do so. But yeah, it'd be very interesting to hear in that regard. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Mark, I was just wondering actually, I know we do quite a lot for different combined authorities. Have you sort of had any feedback from the various authorities in relation particularly to the changes which this legislation is bringing in relation to the way combined authorities can be run or can come together? has the legislation basically been warmly received or not, or do we feel it's just an added complication?
I don't want to say too much, but uh, um, in some areas, like the completely new combined county combined authorities, that would be welcomed in some areas. When you look at changes to combined authorities themselves, then actually there has been a degree of unease. I think that's a gentle way of putting it, with some of those changes coming in, because it enables the mayor to agree to particular things happening, or to require things to happen without consulting or without the agreement of the constituent authorities. And the settlements between the constituent authorities and the mayor was always something which was a question of balance. And certainly in particular, I remember going back a number of years ago to meetings which involved the constituent authorities to be of a combined authority, and they were trying to put in place a whole range of things which would enable things to be, for want of a better term, fixed. And by I mean fixed, being certain rather than just fixed, in order that that things could sort of be run in a way which was based upon consensus. And I think this legislation goes some degree to a sort of undoing that.
Yeah, I've worked on combined authorities in another life, and I, I remember, I was part of the negotiation, etc. And combined authorities were, to an extent, based on compromise and on balance. And there's certainly a lot of the constituent authorities would be concerned that combined authorities, certainly obtaining more planning and highway powers as examples.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see actually what happens here. No, I agree and agree with your comments.
Yeah, I think it's the thing is, I don't know whether or not any other alternative government would be interested in addressing this or not, in terms of that balance being reached, given the amount of things which any new government would be dealing with. But I think it does create tensions. I mean, there is a bit of a tension actually at two levels, between central government and local government in this arena, but also between central government and mayors as well. So all that going into the mix is quite interesting in terms of that sort of engagement.
Well, you can certainly see that working, can't you? With certainly the comments made. For example, I think Manchester is quite sort of outspoken with their
Yeah.
sort of combined authority mayor in relation to central government policy, etc. So yeah, and also I suppose to an extent London as well. So it's an interesting time. Do we have any further questions?
No,
Mark.
not yet. I'm desperately
Well,
hoping
we do like questions, but
we
we also worked on the basis that people probably want some time for a cup of tea and a sandwich as well, and that you wouldn't want us pair drolling on all through your lunchtime as well. So that is something we have taken into consideration as well.
Any further observations?
No?
Very good. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
Appreciated your company. The number of people attending has dwindled bit by bit from 66 down to 59. So on that basis, we'd encourage you to go and have a proper lunch and a good break for your afternoon's work.